Thank you all for being here. Thank you for finding your way here. This is such an interesting topic that so many people are concerned about. I got tons of emails saying, is it recorded? Can I zoom in? So I think there will be a lot of interest in this even after tonight. But thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. This is part of the College Scholars Program at JCCC. The College Scholars Program showcases faculty excellence in research fields that go beyond the classroom to make scholarly contributions to knowledge within the professor's academic discipline. Successful applicants deliver 2 public presentations, and your second one is tomorrow, and receive an honorarium upon demonstrating evidence of expertise within their disciplines and relevance to the topic. So I would like now to introduce Dr. Carlile Carter, who is an assistant professor of interior design at Johnson County Community College with a PhD in human environmental sciences and an emphasis in architectural studies from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Dr. Carlile Carter's research focuses on the impact of material culture on place meanings, older person residential care environments, sustainable design, and interior design pedagogy. She explores individuals' behavior in and attachment to their interior development environments with a particular interest in the transition of older people to new living spaces and the possessions they choose to keep. Heather's interior design practice focuses on residential design. She is an active member of professional organizations such as IDEC, Interior Design Educators Council, ASID, the American Society of Interior Design, and IIDA, the International Interior Design Association, and holds certifications in NCIDQ, which is the National Council of Interior Design Qualification, and LEED, or LEED AP, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, demonstrating her commitment to sustainable and environmentally conscious design. When not engaged with teaching, research, or design, Heather can be found having a cup of coffee or 2 with friends and family. And I had the great pleasure of working with Heather when she started here a couple years ago as a new faculty member, and I just knew she was amazing then, and I just hear what the amazing things she's doing in the classroom. I'm so happy that you chose to sign up to apply for the College Scholar. So, thank you. Heather.
Thank you. So I have 2 things to say thank you to before I begin. I'm really appreciative of College Scholars because it gives support for the research that I love to do. And so I'm very thankful that I get to talk to you tonight about this particular topic that is meaningful to me in lots of different ways and lots of different levels. The other thank you is to my husband who's up here, who is major support to me, who reminds me continually that PhD just means piled higher and deeper, and he keeps me grounded. So all that stuff that you just heard, you can put away, and we will just have a conversation and talk about things that I love to talk about, and I think you will too. So thank you for being here, David, and thank you for the College Scholars. So tonight we're going to talk about right-sizing home while upsizing well-being and reimagining older adult possession management. So if this is an area that gives you stress, that you feel stressed over, take a deep breath, exhale, and know that you are not alone. And hopefully in the reimagining part, we can find some positivity in it. So as we age, I said I was going to walk around more, but my notes are on, I just realized. As we age, our homes should be relaxing environments, but too often the stress of our unmanaged clutter gets in our way. And I've visited with a couple people already, and some of you are feeling stressed and are managing your parents' homes or your own homes, and it is a very stressful place to be sometimes. Right-sizing our possessions allows us to create new surroundings that enhance our health, safety, and well-being as we age. One of the things that I was saying to somebody just before we began was there are reasons that the process is difficult for most people. If it's difficult for you, take heart, you are not alone. This process requires a strategy, and so what I want to do tonight is just talk about it. Just talk about the strategy and different strategies. There's not one, there's lots. But to take a deep breath and remember that you're not alone, that it is difficult for a reason, and it's not because you can't do it. And there are strategies that we can look at. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to look at an overview of past research, the nitty-gritty that my research is built on. We're going to look at ongoing research on the overlap of Maslow's hierarchy, loneliness, and meaningful possessions. And that's the most recent research that I've done that I'm excited to share with you about some of the conclusions. And then we'll look at the implications for household possession, dispossession, and we'll look at potential strategies. I have a handout for everyone that has a number of articles. It has links to websites, and it also has some senior move managers. So you're going to leave with some tools in addition to the research. Okay, in later life possessions, both cherished and ordinary, so it's not just the cherished possessions, but also the ordinary, begin to become an issue for oneself and one's family when moving, particularly in moving from a larger to smaller residences. And I visited with somebody who's saying she wants to move to independent living. She has a big house. She has to get rid of stuff. How does that happen? And it's difficult. This is from a research study that I participated in. You can see the cherished and the ordinary. This is real stuff from real people. And it probably looks very familiar to all of you. Older adults who leave the family home typically have 3 moves. So the first move you think of is when we retire and we decide now is a good time for us to go do something fun. We've worked really hard. We're going to go golf. We're going to go see the kids. We're going to get in an RV, whatever it is that is your goal and your dream, you're going to do that. And people tend to do that until such point in time there is an illness that gets them to a point where they're not able to manage that alone. And so they return typically home to children. And the children then help them manage that for a period of time. Sometimes they live with children, sometimes they live close to children, but the children are really an asset at that point in time. Then it becomes too much, even for the children. And so then they go typically to a third move, and that third move is for some type of institution, and use the term institutional really loosely, but care that is provided by others. This third move requires a process known as household disbandment, which is characterized by 3 criteria. It is necessary, where you're no longer thinking maybe, maybe not. It's necessary. It's comprehensive. Everything is on the chopping block. Everything has to be reviewed. And then it's anticipatory of death. The term used here is typically liminal, which means you're at the point of understanding that you are dying, not in the distant future, but relatively soon, in the next little bit. You're not actively dying, but you're aware that your death is imminent, sooner rather than later. Let's take a look at some past research and a framework for this, and it won't be surprising to you that the framework is currently being established, because longevity as we know it has been really extended. And then the other thing that's extended and that's changed is that I visited with Mary Jean and her sister, and there are 4 children, or 6 children, 6 children in their family. That is unusual now. People don't have huge families. They don't have a lot of children to help them process what we're talking about. And so that's another change. There's something called beanpole families, which often may be 2 children or 1 child. And that person then gets the bulk of trying to figure out what to do. So there's research now that's ongoing about this whole process that didn't exist before. So the research, there's a timeline here, and the seminal research by Csikszentmihalyi. I had to get a PhD to learn how to say that. Csikszentmihalyi, and Rochberg-Halton in 1981. Following that, there's some research by Belk in 1988, Klein and Baker in 2004, then Eckert and Sargent. I love David Eckert's work, and he is here locally, and he was at KU and was part of the gerontology department up there. And then 2 studies that I've participated in, we're going to look at those before we look at my most recent study. So Csikszentmihalyi, Rochberg, Halton in 1981, they researched the meaning of household objects. And they studied in the Chicago area 82 families, and those families comprised 3 generations. And what they found was that household possessions were used to cultivate meanings that moved the owners toward the ultimate goals of their existence. And we thought it was a broom, right? But cultivate meanings that moved owners towards the ultimate goals of one's existence. And during my research, talking to people about their stuff, one man, it was so meaningful to me. He was a fighter pilot in World War II in the Pacific arena. He was 18 years old. He didn't do well in school before that, but he did well as a fighter pilot. He did really well as a fighter pilot. He was the squadron leader, and this is before all the technology and whatnot, navigation systems. He's flying above the clouds, and what he's looking for is a hole in the clouds. And once you go down the hole in the clouds, you have no idea what's underneath, and everybody followed him. His most prized possession was an old scrappy toolbox, because he followed his dad around when he was during the Depression and they couldn't find work. And work is your existence. And at 5 years old, he was he was picking onions at 5 years old for commercial sale. He remembers the smell. He remembers being out there in the wet. So he remembers in his toolbox, if he had to get rid of everything else, it was his toolbox, because that was the ultimate goal of his existence, was to be able to work. Older participants, so there are 3 generations. Older participants tended to cherish possessions for their contemplative value versus action value. Just kind of put that in the back in your parking lot in your brain, because when we talk about the millennials, that's going to come up again, right? Okay, Belk, who was in consumer sciences and marketing, he came up with the idea, and it's very prevalent now within this discipline. It's the extended self. Possessions central to self may be visualized around the core self and will differ over individuals, over time, and over cultures that create shared symbolic meaning for different goods. So you have your core self, those things that are important, and they go through time and they go through culture. The thing that Belk said is it really extends who you are. And so when you're thinking about your possessions and extending who you are, one of the examples he gave was a gun. And you think of all the stuff that's going on right now, right? But a gun is considered an extension of one's self. For those people who have it, the gun protects them. The gun, in many ways, it's an extension of self. So when we talk about asking people to get rid of their possessions at an older age and go, you just need to get rid of that, how do you cut off self? Klein and Baker in 2004 then researched possession attachment. Place attachment has been how we are attached to places. Has been studied quite a bit, but possession attachment, they really looked at in about 2004. And they came up with through all their research, there were 2 primary categories. One was self-value, self-definitional or value in those possessions, and the other was self-continuity, self-change. That was what was valued in the possessions. So I gave all of you a piece of paper, unless you came in a little bit after I did it. And Farrell, do you want to? And what I'd like you to do now, just for a moment, is to think of a possession or a couple possessions. And I want you to look at the self-definitional value. And I'm going to start by just showing you one of mine. And I would call this is a possession of mine that is very dear to me. It was very disappointing a number of years ago when Dave and I were down at Eureka Springs or somewhere, and we walked into an antique store and there was one. I was like, I'm sorry, not an antique. I'm not an antique. This can't be an antique, but it was there. So when I was a little girl, I loved dolls. I just loved dolls. I loved baby dolls. I loved babies. I loved babies and baby dolls. When my sister was born, I was 6 years old, my littlest sister. I took her to show and tell. The Catholic girls were not impressed. For me, I was super excited. A baby had come. And she was my baby, and I loved baby dolls, and I just loved it. Well, my mom took ceramics classes, and my mom was ill most of my childhood, unto death ill most of my childhood. And so when she took ceramic classes, and she made this for me, and she loved dolls, and she loved babies, and it's signed with her name on the bottom. Someday it'll be in an antique store and nobody will know who Irene was, but I know. And it is, so for me, you can see that it's autobiographical, it's storytelling, it's contemplative. Who am I? What can I do? Can I mother? I can mother. I'm a good mom. Self-boundary regulation, what I am not. It is not a basketball. I have no basketball, volleyballs, tennis balls in my house unless the dog is eating them. Self-cultivation and self-development. All of this I developed and I cultivated because it was meaningful to me. The most important thing in the world for me, my life goal was to be a good mom. And my affiliations. I hang out with moms. I hang out with other really good moms, right? And so I want you to think about a possession that you have and just think about it for just a moment. One of the possessions that you have, and think about the autobiographical, the storytelling, the contemplation of who you are, and just write that object down. Nobody's going to see this. This isn't for anybody. It's just for you, but it's just self-definitional. What value does that thing have? What story does it tell? You know, you can take just quick notes, bullet points. What does that item tell about you? So what do you think the next category is self-continuity, self-change, and it contributes to that value of the person. What do you think that might mean? What self-preservation, adaptive, what kind of items do you think that might be? Does anybody have any thoughts? Mary Jean? Yeah, it could be that, yeah. Can you think about anything that you have that demonstrates an adaptation that maybe you didn't want, but you have and that is important to you because you have that adaptation? Can you think of anything like that?
I have a number of things from after my parents split. I have my father.
See, doesn't that make sense? So your self-continuity, who you were, changed. You were no longer the son of a married couple. And so who you were in that way changed. And so you adapted and you have those things. So later in one of my studies, I'm going to talk about that the things we possess don't always have for us pleasant memories. We still keep them because they say we're an overcomer, that we can survive. And so it's important to realize, particularly as you're getting rid of things or helping other people get rid of things, it may look negative to you, but it says something. Okay, next, Eckert and Sargent. So I think it's Julie Sargent did household disbandment, and their research was funded by the National Institute for Aging. Is it for aging or on aging? Anyway, it's one of them. There's a preposition involved there. And they're right here locally, and as I said, at KU. And when I was looking at this research, just thinking about what I wanted to research, I couldn't find anybody who was researching what I researched. And then lo and behold, I found David Eckert, and he was here locally, and I was able to visit with him and do an independent study with him, and I was just thrilled about that. He is now retired, but he's still in this area. And so they did a study here in Kansas City, with 38 older adults in 30 households in 2002. And they had moved from the previous year to smaller households somewhere in Lawrence, Kansas, or the Kansas City area. And they were aged from 60 to 87. They functionally participated in the moves, and couples who were residing in the same household were interviewed together. The qualitative analysis that they did describes the various tasks that were undertaken by family members, how family members asserted themselves in the process. So this is about if you're helping, and how they were, and where was the outlet for possessions, and the way that some possessions were shared, and the implications for family identity stories. Then they continued on with this. There was one of the limitations of the study was that there weren't, the households that they looked at tended to have a higher income bracket. There weren't households that were as diverse as they would like with National Institute of Aging. And so they did what was a Midwest study that they incorporated both Detroit, people from Detroit, as well as people from Kansas City. And so they did 98 older adults in 79 households between 2008 and 2013. And there was a more comprehensive set of questions. So it was 2 sites, so it was both Detroit and Kansas City, and holistic design. So by holistic design, this is going to come up again, holistic just means they were studying the same thing, asking the same questions, but of 2 different groups. And there was economic diversity in that. And what they came up with on all of that were the family helping methods. They came up with a number of things, but this is one of the things that I wanted to highlight tonight. And families tend to participate in a spectrum of ways. And doesn't that make sense? And the spectrum goes from controlling to removed, with participatory in the middle. Be aware that in that spectrum, this is just looking at what people are doing, the reality of, it's not judging, it's not saying it's bad if you're controlling or it's good if you're participatory or good if you're removed. They're just looking at all the different ways that they did that. Family members, often adult children of the older adults in the controlling homes, forced the issue generally out of concern for health and safety. They had difficulty listening to the many stories about possessions their parents told during the process, because I had a story. Think about a household of stories and how tedious that becomes. And yet those stories are identity. Sometimes they went behind the parents and threw or gave away belongings their parents wanted to keep. So there was a trust issue that was involved. In the middle of the continuum, family members participated with older adults, but generally, the older adults had the agency with the disbandment process. The younger adults, the children, provided assistance as needed, but they did not take charge of the event. And then on the opposite end of the continuum from controlling family members are those who are completely removed from the process. One of my interview participants in a different study, obviously, but one of those participants, the older adults, had everything done and then told the children. So the children were removed here, but it isn't because the children, it's because the older adults were like, yeah, you don't have a say in this, okay? And so they wanted their children not to come and do a bunch of things. So the effects to the family as a whole are as you would anticipate. There are usually too many chefs in the kitchen if the whole family is involved. There are a lot of chefs. There's boatloads of advice, and sometimes that advice is not well received. I did a study called Storied Possession. It was a multi-case, holistic case study that involved 16 households with 23 older adults. And it was in the Midwest in states around Kansas. And the question that I asked was, how did post-disbandment older adults embed the meaning of family when making place in new residences? So how does that happen? How do you embed family when this wasn't the family home? Can family be embedded through possessions, and if so, how? And what I found was, as I mentioned before, that family meanings included high points, low points, and everyday engagements of their family stories. That when you went from the family home to a much smaller space, sometimes assisted living, you still kept all three. That you are not trying to erase bad memory. That is not what's going on. That is not, unless they want that to go on. And I did have participants who did want that to go on. They wanted to completely erase. I had a man who sold his home and sold everything and brought new because he couldn't get over the grief. What he did keep, he kept his childhood bed, he kept his childhood dresser, he kept some knickknacks, some small knickknacks, he kept some needlework that his wife had done, but he got rid of everything else because it was too much. So for him, that adaptive quality that we talked about a little bit ago meant the willingness to start over at 83 years old. The other study that I participated in, you saw some of those video photographs earlier, was late life accumulation, proliferation, and stagnation of home contents. And it was a phenomenological study of 10 aging in place dwellers. It was qualitative and quantitative. I think you probably all know that, but I'm just going to, in case you don't. Qualitative means we're looking at themes. We're not trying to generalize for the entire population. We're trying to get deep, rich information. Quantitative involves numbers and can be generalized more easily than qualitative. So the oldest old, age 90 plus, this is my great-grandmother and my little sister who now is approaching an older adult herself, and Mrs. Beasley. Does anybody remember Mrs. Beasley? She loved Mrs. Beasley. So these people, the oldest old, that's the term that is used, is the oldest old. They're most vulnerable to risks within the home due to their age-related declines. But these are 10 people who chose to stay in their homes at great sacrifice. They had both physical and cognitive declines. There was one woman whose laundry was downstairs, and she had horrible arthritis and she was over 90, would take her laundry basket and take a step up and put the laundry basket down and do the rosary all the way up. That's how she got up and down the stairs to do her laundry. That's how much it meant to her to stay in that house. So one of the items was possession accumulation. One of the women said, this was hysterical, nobody needs 6 cake safes, but I have 6 cake safes. She's 90 years old, over 90. And she went on to say, and I actually have 7. Someone borrowed one and didn't return it. The other thing that we saw was unused spaces. So when you become an empty nester and you stay in the house, basically what happens is those extra rooms become storage containers. One of the studies that Eckerd did that I haven't covered here talks about that statistically people stop having garage sales or any kind of giveaway, mass giveaway once the kids leave, but they keep accumulating. So in terms of strategies, you might not want to stop doing the giveaway, right? Because if you've got space, and how do we know this is true? How do we know this is accurate? Look at the storage units that are being constructed all over every metropolitan area. So these are the three themes that we titled as stuff, stress, and strife. All of these people were so filled with shame and stress about the stuff they had. Collections that they spent a life collecting stuff that just became clutter. Out of sight, out of mind, those repurposing of spaces, they could put them away and then they'd be out of sight, and that helps you not think about it, and that helps you not feel the shame of too much stuff. So I'm not going to talk about hoarding a whole bunch here because that's outside of my scope, but I'm going to mention it for two reasons. Hoarding is a mental, it's in the DSM, there's some mental issues about it. It's bigger than clutter, and it's real, and as people age, hoarding becomes worse. So just to be aware of that. It is a significant health burden. The other reason that I mention this is because as a qualitative researcher, primarily a qualitative researcher, COVID put me into some quantitative, but primarily as a qualitative researcher, it's my duty to inform people of the themes that I do so that you can see where my bias is coming from. And I was raised in a hoarder's household. And so everything that I talk about, it is meaningful to me, not in a shame-based way, but meaningful in that there's understanding that beyond clutter into hoarding, that needs extra help. That's different than what I'm talking about here, okay? Hoarding is a bigger bandage, okay? So it would not be wise to approach hoarders with some of the stuff that we're talking about today. It just wouldn't be wise. It would be counterproductive. It would be hurtful to both you and them. That is a photograph of my parents' dining room table. So the study that I'm going to talk about tonight is about possession and isolation. That is a study I did in the fall of from 2021 to 2022. I had grant money. I was going to do a qualitative case study with older adults on Maslow's hierarchy and how that related to their possessions. And COVID happened, and nobody was talking to older adults during COVID. You're a stranger, you're not getting in it, you're not getting access, nor would I want to. I don't want to jeopardize somebody. So the purpose of this study was to gain understanding from older adults about their use of personal possessions to help with loneliness experienced during social isolation. We evaluated the relationship between owning possessions that reflected the three upper levels of Maslow's hierarchy, so love, self-esteem, and self-actualization, and older adult loneliness experienced during COVID-19 isolation. Basically, what I wanted to know is, there are going to be other episodes like the pandemic. Is there a way for us to structure possessions such that isolation is less painful? Is there a way for that to happen? That's really what I wanted to know. Social isolation and loneliness are major risk factors that are linked with poor physical and mental health status and are likely to be primary health outcomes of our global experience of COVID-19. And this was a COVID-19 where there's glass between. So you all know this, Maslow's hierarchy, but that's really what I was looking at and going, okay, can possessions be sorted out? And is there a way, what I wanted to know, is there a way, if they can be sorted out, could we then help people sort out their stuff by saying, do you need 6 sewing machines that all reflect the same thing, right? Do you need 6 cake stands if they all reflect the same thing? Just trying to think of a way to help. So these were the research questions, and these are closed-ended questions. They're not open-ended questions. Qualitative questions usually are what and how, not how many or if yes or no, but these are, I had to go into quantitative research into a survey. So research question 1, do post-household disbandment older adults have possessions that reflect fulfillment of Maslow's hierarchy needs for love, self-esteem, and self-actualization? And the second research question, did possessions that reflected fulfillment of those needs ameliorate post-household disbandment older adult loneliness during COVID? It was a mixed methods exploratory study, 360 survey participants that were 65 and older. We adapted to validated scales. And so a validated scale, so when you think of scales, you're thinking of what you do on Saturday morning that you don't like doing, getting on and weighing, right? That's not what this kind of scale is. This kind of scale, it's research questions that are combined to get to the answer. But I wanted a scale that had already been tested for reliability, which measured consistency, and validity, which measures precision. I didn't want to, it takes years and tremendous effort to create a scale, and I wanted to see if there were any out there. And so I was able to find 2 that I adapted. And I conducted 32 semi-structured interviews. What I'm going to talk to you tonight, though, is the presentation will be on the survey results, not the interview results. So over here, you can see these are some example statements from Lester's scale that measures the degree of satisfaction of Maslow's basic needs. So if you look at those statements, and then the scale would say, I have some amount, I have 2, I have no amount, right? And so there were 32 belonging, esteem, and self-actualization statements. So remember, I'm looking at 3 buckets, and that comes up later. So these are ways, you can read that, ways that I adapted the scale to talk about possessions. And then de Jong's, Gerville's loneliness scale, and it's widely used to measure loneliness. And these are statements that are part of that scale. And I didn't adapt those, I used those as is. Actually, I'm going to go back just a moment. Notice that on the belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, notice that you have statements that seem contrary. So I feel rootless. I'm uncertain about the goals in my life. So those statements, then to translate those into, I have possessions that demonstrate I feel rootless. Okay? So hold on to that in your brain for just a moment, and then we'll go over it. So the survey results, to address research question 1, an exploratory factor analysis was performed on the 32 items for 361 participants, which just means you start looking for buckets. I anticipated 3 buckets to see if there were 3 bucketfuls of, I have possessions in this bucket, I have possessions in this bucket, and I have possessions in this bucket. What happened was we ended up with 2 buckets, not 3 buckets. And so factor 1, bucket 1, was measured belonging and self-definition. And factor 2 measured adaptation and continuation. What does that sound like? If you think about previous research that we talked about. We'll go back to that. The survey results of the loneliness scale, DJG was the guy's name, right? ANOVAs were used to examine significant differences between categorical demographic variables and participants' loneliness. examination of pairwise comparison were used to dichotomize the demographic data. So we looked at married, not married, college degree, no college degree, male, female, for the regression. So we're just seeing what groups together. That's all this means. What groups together and how the grouping, does the grouping impact one another? And that's all the ANOVAs and the multiple regression mean. It's just grouping to see about what might contribute to loneliness. So the results are R squared of 0.31 or 31% of the variance was explained with the model of two factors, so two buckets. Results showed that factor one or bucket one was the best predictor of loneliness, followed by those who had college degrees. So factor one, and we're going to go back to what factor one was, and factor two, it did contribute. Factor two and participants' gender did play a role, not marriage. Marriage didn't, but gender did. Okay? So let's talk about that for a moment. So the exploratory factor analysis aligns with Klein and Baker's. Remember we talked about, and I had you write down on what the self-definitional, but there were two things. One was adaptive, one was self-definitional, right? My buckets kind of aligned with those buckets, not with Maslow. So self-definitional, which means you have self-boundaries and affiliation. Self-continuity and self-change are adaptation. Older adults' possessions exemplified the three areas of self-esteem, love, and self-actualization, but they factored into these two categories. One contained more items representing belonging, which is that theme of affiliation that we saw with Klein and Baker. And factor two contained more ambivalence with self-acceptance. So people who said, yeah, I have belongings that demonstrate I'm rootless. I have belongings that demonstrate that people don't respect my opinion. So factor one, measuring belonging and self-definition, was the best indicator of loneliness. The older adults with possessions that demonstrated relationship with others, self-esteem and self-actualization experienced a higher degree of loneliness during COVID. Factor two, measuring adaptation and continuation, experienced less loneliness. Older adults with possessions that demonstrated what might be considered negative reflections, dissatisfaction with self, inferior opinions, experienced a lower degree of loneliness during COVID isolation. Seems totally counterintuitive, not what I anticipated. So this is a perhaps. This isn't in concrete. Factor one, older adults had richer social capital to begin with, as reflected in their possessions, than factor two, older adults at the time of the pandemic. So they had the relationships, and then they didn't. Factor one, older adults expressed greater loneliness because their social isolation experienced a greater deficit, or factor one, greater deficit in comparison with factor two, older adults at that time. So what is the implications to this? So what that says is some people who are experiencing isolation have adapted to isolation. Possessions do reflect an achievement of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People said, yeah, I've got the stuff. Possessions, however, cannot replace people during episodic social isolation, such as was experienced during the pandemic. So no, possessions are not going to make up that deficit. However, technological possessions, and this did come out in my interviews, so I'm covering it here, that provide bridges of communication during physical isolation can help with loneliness. So the importance of that technology. Possession management needs to be ongoing so that older adults have healthy residences during episodic social isolation. There's something called sick building syndrome. The more stuff you have that accumulates dust that can get mold and stuff like that, you can get a sick house when you do that, which means the people in the house get sick because the house is sick. So you can alleviate sick building syndrome, improve the indoor air quality, and reduce older adult and family stress, fall hazards, and fire hazards. So all of this, it's bigger than a Band-Aid, right? It's a big deal because what you know about fall hazards, what do you know about fall hazards? Y'all know it, right? That happens and it's the end, right? Fall hazards are typically the end. So moving towards right-sizing, retaining possessions during household disbandment that support older adult well-being. David, my love. Oh, okay. I have included in here also my business card, so if any of you want to get a hold of me and talk to me about this, I love talking about this stuff. So in this package there is an article, When Downsizing Inspires Creativity. It's one of the last articles. She says, I'm 72, I can do whatever the hell I want. And I think that's a great way to go into downsizing. And you see some beautiful photos. They're not your style probably, but there's some beautiful photographs of what she did. Here's some books that have helpful strategies. And there's some articles in there about the books from the Wall Street Journal. This is an image of a guy who goes, what do you mean you want me to come get my stuff? I'm sorry, what? When your parents make you go through your old stuff. And that is, if you're interested in the PowerPoint with the hot links, I can send it to you and you can go through and look at all of these. So 73 oddly specific items to declutter today. So that helps you in the process. It gets you started. Then for those of you who have clutter and you're going, this seems pretty significant, clutter is a trauma response to narcissistic abuse. Then again, when your parents want to go through your stuff, there is an undeniable link between trauma and clutter. So just be aware of that as you're helping people. And you might want to look at these links and follow the links and listen to some of the stuff. And then overcoming clutter paralysis. The overcoming clutter paralysis, that person, I don't know her name, but I mean, she has a system and she walks you through it and she's super excited to be there with you. So what questions do you have for me?
This is really interesting information.
I love this.
Yeah,
stuff.
You can tell that you love it. I'm just curious about what kinds of objects would represent some of these things you're talking about.
In Maslow's?
No, just in the families that you dealt with. For example, an object that would represent being rootless, or if I'm understanding this correctly, these objects, things that were saved, were categorized into different areas in the study. And for those different areas, I'm trying to visualize examples
of what that
of
might
an
be.
object might be.
In rootless.
Yes.
So I don't have, because it was a survey, I don't have the specifics on that group of people that did those answers, those 361. I don't have the specific about what the object might be. I can tell you that one of the people from a previous study, so that adaptation or not feeling respected, there was a woman who was in her 80s, she was 83, and she, one of her prized possessions that she moved into assisted living with her, or a senior apartment, much smaller. And she moved from the West Coast and she moved here to be with children. And it was a massive painting that her sister did of her, that her sister painted after her divorce. And it was of her reclining in a suggestive manner. And what that said is, I'm desirable, and that I'm desirable after my divorce. So that's one that was, and it was very meaningful to her, because it said, she felt like she'd been in a narcissistic relationship. She was no longer in a narcissistic relationship, and she had potential to move forward. Another one was an urn, and it was older adults who lost an adult son in a motorcycle accident, and it was their most prized possession. It was his ashes. Interesting, the people who had items of self-actualization couldn't necessarily tell you where they were. They had them. They had arrived. They didn't need it. It was lovely. It was like, it wasn't what I anticipated. It was like, yeah, I'm not hanging that. No need. I know who I am. I don't need it. So, good question. I hope that helps.
That association you were talking about, national. They're having a friend of mine belongs to that. They're having a conference here, like this coming week.
Oh, I bet David Eckert will be there.
Down at Lowe's Hotel. Yeah, she's going to it. So
It's this weekend?
mm-hmm. Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to just listen to them. They've got stories.
Yeah.
The deal is that because they're a business, they're on time, and they've got a method, and the meaning of those possessions does not matter to them, and so they can help you move through based on lots of study about the way to get you to move through. I have had participants who've used them and felt good about it, but at the end of the day, there were some things like one woman in Dallas, they used them, but they had convinced her to get rid of her napping couch. And she was a tall woman, and they had gotten a couch that fit inside on that specific wall, and the other would have fit. It just wouldn't have looked. You wouldn't have had end tables on both sides, and maybe it would have overlapped a little bit or something anyway. But she couldn't nap. And so it messed with her daily routine. And so that's the piece that trying to really be specific about what the meaning of the thing is. Like, it's not just that I'm attached to this sofa. This is the sofa I can nap on because I'm a tall person. And I don't want to and sometimes move managers or people say, well, just nap in your bed. She's 90 years old. She's not going to be napping in her bed. That would mean something different to her than napping on the sofa. So those are the things that stumbling blocks that can happen if we're not aware.
So interesting. So, yeah, many things to think about. Anybody else? Well, okay. I will say we have refreshments down in the lobby, so we can continue the conversation down there after this.
Well, my husband, he's really the only one left in his family. So all these possessions mean an awful lot to him. Mm-hmm. And, that's just the way it is for him. Yep. And so, but I've actually hired some people to help me go through my closet.
That's excellent.
Because
it's
so hard to face on.
About you start with your closet.
Yeah.
Don't start with meaningful stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, it's something I think about all the time because I helped my husband's aunts. I emptied their house. Mm-hmm. We helped our mother empty her home and downsize.
It's a big deal. What I would say is just do it. And it doesn't mean you have to do it all at once or anything, right. But if you spend a little bit of time doing a drawer or something like that, the deal is you got to do a little bit at a time. There's something called safe passage, and it's very, very difficult for your husband, particularly we want to give safe passage to those belongings, because if we don't, it is as if we have been disloyal to our ancestors.
Oh, I can totally see that. Yeah.
So is there a way to give safe passage is the question when it's not a family member? And there are. Making sure that it goes to someone in need. Like I had some people down in Dallas, and they had they were from Atchison, Kansas. They had the candy factory, and they had the flour mill. That generationally, their family were there when the wagon train stopped there, and that's where the furniture came from. It came off the boat from St. Louis, came there, and then they had those 4 generations in Dallas. And when they moved from their large house to a much smaller, independent living, they had 2 children who went, yeah, no. And the way she said it to me when I talked to her about it, she said, it killed me. And I said, how did you deal with it? And she said, I blocked it off. And because she gave it to, they ended up selling it, but not and they were valuable things. And they ended up selling, but the amount they got for was nothing, and that felt worse to them. And so it wasn't safe passage. So safe passage would be, if you give it to Blessings Abound that supports a tremendous amount of charities, have you given it safe passage? Those are questions that I would ask. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to continue the conversation.